I stopped counting the trout quintets that I'd done at 120 or something like that. That's way back. And I can honestly say that I still love it every time I play it. And what I love about it is that I love the interactions. I love how things are different each time. I love how I can respond to the different lines, different instruments each time, and I discover something new every single time I play the piece.
I got connected with Anthony Manzo through Eric Roy of Upton Bass. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. And when Eric emailed me and said, hey, Anthony Manzo, Tony Manzo would make a great interview subject, I went online and looked around a bit. I was like, well, yeah, he absolutely would, because for many reasons, but one is that he has this amazing career as a chamber double bassist, which I think is cool and fascinating and still somewhat rare, though it is becoming less rare over time, as we see with people like Sybarite 5, Louis Levitt, and Eric Snoza in the Fifth House Ensemble, and other groups like that. So it's starting to become a little more of a common thing. Renan Meyer, Time for Three, Nick Villalobos of Simply Three, but Anthony Manzo, he is making his career playing chamber music, chamber orchestra in many groups, including the New Century Chamber Orchestra, which is based here in San Francisco. And I thought, oh, well, how perfect is that? Maybe we can get together sometime when he's in town. So Tony and I got together a beautiful day here in 2017 and sat out in Washington Square Park, one of the famous spots in San Francisco's North Beach neighborhood. As we're chatting on the mic, this is one of the things I love about podcasting. You pull out the gear, you set up on a bench, and most people kind of give you a wide berth when those mics come out. And that was generally the case in this park, but you'll hear buses going by, and you won't hear this, but I do remember some kind of peculiar looking characters stop, swivel, and stare at us as we're talking. So it's the adventure of chatting in public. We dig into some truly fascinating and hilarious and painful, you'll totally empathize, travel stories, including one with Tony going to the Bergen Chamber Orchestra. It's a great audition story. And just what's satisfying about playing chamber music in general, how Anthony approaches preparing parts, how he uses the score, not only in chamber groups, but in orchestral settings. It's a great conversation with a great artist. Know you're going to love this episode. And we've got some wonderful sponsors for today's episode: Robertson & Sons Violins, the Upton Bass String Instrument Company, and A440 Violin Shop. More on them later. But let's dive in, and we will start off with a couple of excerpts from Dave Anderson's wonderful bass duets. This is with Anthony and Rob Nairn, performing in 2014. Actually, maybe could we start by just talking about what your professional landscape looks like, the groups that you're regularly playing in these days?
Sure. Yeah, it's really an eclectic mix, and one of the things I love most about what I do and feel luckiest about is I play a lot with the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and I'm the principal bassist with the New Century Chamber Orchestra out in San Francisco, and sort of acting principal with the Handel and Haydn Society Orchestra in Boston doing period stuff, and play also often with Philharmonie Baroque in San Francisco, and then filling in all the gaps and things that are chamber music in all sorts of places.
And speaking of San Francisco, we're actually sitting here in San Francisco. Anthony's got a concert a little bit later with New Century Chamber Orchestra, and we were just chatting about your job in Munich that you ended up getting, and it just sort of ties into the travel you do and everything. And so, could you maybe just talk about it? And also, it's a great story of every bass player's nightmare, but kind of with a happy ending. Can you maybe just talk about that? The
actual audition?
The actual audition and the circumstances surrounding it?
Sure. It was one of the craziest days of my life. I was playing in an orchestra in Bergen, Norway, and went down for an audition for the solo bass job in the Munich Chamber Orchestra. And a longer story, a little shorter, Lufthansa lost my bass on the way down. and discovered it finally the next day, just an hour or so before the audition was supposed to start, but it was in London. And so I ended up going into the hall and asking for if anything could be done, and they said, well, we'll make sure we can put you very last in the first round, so you have as much time as possible for the bass to get there. And of course that didn't happen, so I ended up walking into the room with 40 people or whatever and asking if anybody wants to loan me a bass, which luckily there was one person who was generous enough to do that, and so I played the first couple of rounds on his bass, but he was the last person to play in the round except for me, so it was at both times it was he walked off the stage and handed me the bass, and I went and had to play, and have no recollection of how I played at all, but apparently it went well enough to advance both those times, but then that bass player didn't advance, and so I had to go back into the room for the third round and ask if I could borrow another bass from somebody, which nobody was really thrilled about, but someone finally eventually did. But of course they were all German bow players at that point, and I'm a French bow player, so I had to play this round on an unfamiliar bass and a German bow, which was kind of disastrous, and didn't advance from there. And so I left the hall, but as I left the hall, suddenly a truck pulls up and dropped my bass on the sidewalk, and so I tried to get them to take it right back to the airport because I had no way of getting it back there and couldn't. And they said, no way, it's not my job. So I didn't know what to do. I took the bass back inside to ask if anybody could help me get the bass back to the airport. And the orchestra was taking a break from the auditions at the moment in Germany, or the full orchestras listened to the auditions, and they saw me there and said, is that your bass? And I said, yeah, it is. And they said, well, we'd like to hear you on your own instrument. And so I was thrilled about that, and I opened the case and found that the sound post had been knocked down and the bridge had been knocked down, and just started laughing. It was one of those, okay, well, what else could go wrong today? And so I asked them if I could have 20 minutes in a coat hanger, and I played with it and got the sound post set back up again to some degree, and went in and played, and they asked me to play all the early rounds again, and then advanced me to the final round, which was chamber music. But in Germany, auditions are always done with solo strings, so you can play with the piano from the early rounds, which meant that the chamber music round, we all had to use a different bass because we couldn't use solo strings. So I grabbed my fourth bass of the day and played through the chamber music round, and they gave me the job at the end, which was totally crazy. But so actually ended up being, in retrospect, really a lucky thing for me, because I realized, looking back on it, that first off, it put me in a mindset where I wasn't worried about anything I played. Any mistake that happened or something like that, I immediately kept right on going because it wasn't my fault. And I'm sure that was a positive thing in the end. And the other aspect of it that I found was that, and especially in talking to my colleagues later, is that I was really lucky that I got to show other parts of my personality, who I am, and that because of how I responded to difficult situations. And this is a group that travels half of every month, and lots of stuff happens when you're traveling, and things go on all the time. And so they got to see how I would respond in those situations, which was with laughter and hey, let's just make this happen somehow, and we'll do it. And it could have been that the other bass players in the finals certainly could have had the same response to something like that, but I'm the only one that got to show it, and it was obviously a huge factor in them choosing me. And one of the reasons I think it's so important that auditions, when you're trying to find someone who you want to play with for the rest of your career or something, you should be looking at as much as possible, because it's how you play is incredibly important, but really only one aspect of what it takes to really make great music.
Well, and how often things don't go your ideal way, the way you want.
Absolutely.
And with any sort of travel, what a big factor that is. And just you've got so many great travel stories. So many things that I want to talk about. But you spend a lot of the time on planes these days, going between different places. And we were sharing taking your bass. I think you started off. It was in Arizona, in Phoenix. It was like almost 100. Can you just take us through that sequence of? That
was a tour with the Munich Chamber Orchestra, in a U.S. tour we did, and we started in Phoenix, and the high for when we arrived was 96 degrees, with almost like 0% humidity. I can't remember exactly, but and flew from there to upstate New York, where it was snowing and cold, and from there to Texas, where it was almost 100 degrees or something like that. I don't remember exactly. Then to Colorado, where it was high and dry, and San Francisco, and then we flew to Alaska. The last stop was in Alaska, where the day before we were supposed to fly there was minus 64, and I found out all the flights had been canceled because that's the temperature where jet fuel freezes. And so I called them up and said, we're supposed to fly tomorrow. And they said, we'll check in with us tomorrow, but it looks like more possible. So I called the next morning and they said, yeah, we're flying, no problem. It's minus 46, that's easy. Then I arrived there, and actually my bass ended up being left on the tarmac, sitting there for quite a while, which was a pretty horrifying experience. And I brought the bass in, and sure, it was going to be an absolute mess. And luckily I have a very, very solid instrument. It was really cold, but totally fine. I didn't have any problem with it.
Well, so you got this career traveling all over and playing this with these wonderful chamber music groups, and what a cool career! What a unique career for a bass player to have. You know, it's something that I'm imagining you didn't envision this for yourself when you were starting out in music school.
Absolutely not. It was something maybe if I'd dreamed, I thought, well, would that be great if, but it's not a career I ever would have and didn't really pursue specifically. I mean, I can't make a career playing chamber music on the bass. But I was fascinated and loved playing in chamber orchestras, which especially when there's just one bass is about as close as we can get to it, to playing chamber music. And it's still the format that is closest to my heart with in playing the bass. But through that, I ended up also making a lot of the chamber music contacts that I have with working with people in those situations, and people seeing me playing by myself and can see how I interact and how I relate, and those are the things that draw the chamber music world in, and so that's how my career turned in that direction.
Well, and we were talking about the sort of multiple roles that you play as a bass player, the dual roles, and like being nimble, and then also being the foundation. And you found a bass that works really well for that. Can you just talk a bit about your bass and how those different roles work for you as a chamber player?
Certainly. I feel really lucky. I have a beautiful instrument made by Jérôme Thibouville-Lamy about 1890, and it's really kind of perfectly suited for the kind of playing I'm doing. That it has the very sort of typical clarity of a French instrument, so it's nimble and facile, and for lighter passages and things where I'm, for example, we're doing Beethoven Opus 95 string quartet this week in the Mahler arrangement, and allows me to join in the cello sound, and when things are nimble and facile and really clear. But one of the other challenges with the bass, especially in a chamber orchestra situation with one bass, is there are a lot of times when a single instrument has to sound like an entire section, and this particular instrument of mine also has a bottom end that just keeps going, and it's a great combination. I don't find that too often in instruments, with that balance between a real strong full bottom end, but that facileness and nimbleness.
More from our conversation with Anthony in just a moment, but I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Upton Bass String Instrument Company. Again, Eric Roy over at Upton Bass is the person that connected Tony and me. So grateful to him for that. And they're doing wonderful things for the bass world. What they did for Tony is convert his bass to have a removable neck so that he could travel more easily. And we got a link in the show notes over at Upton's site, stringrepair.com. And you can see exactly what they did to Tony's bass and how it works. And traveling is no joy, as you'll see as we continue with this interview. But Upton is doing their best to make it easier for bassists worldwide. So thank you, Upton, for both sponsoring the podcast and for doing what you do for the bass community. And I want to give a shout out to Robertson & Sons Violins, one of the household names in the double bass world for over 4 decades. They have been connecting string instruments and bows to collectors, professional musicians, music educators, and students of all ages and all corners of the globe. I've had the privilege to go to Albuquerque many times over the years. My wife is from Albuquerque, and I just love stopping in at Robertson's and trying out instruments. They have this beautiful recital hall. You can take instruments in and play. What a cool way to demo instruments. When I was there recently, I was playing some basses from the 18th century. I was just blown away. I could have stayed there for days and days and days trying out basses and bows. So many great instruments. And if you go to our website, you can see some of what they are currently offering. So robertsonviolins.com is their website. And thank you guys for sponsoring the podcast. Really appreciate it. All right, back to our conversation with Anthony Manzo.
I'd love to know how. I've done very limited playing in conductorless groups, especially the size of a chamber orchestra like New Century. Like how do rehearsals function with all of you? I'd love to know.
It's really different in different groups. I've played with many different groups, and each group has very different ways of approaching that. New Century is a little tradition or historically been a little more freeform. There's not any particular rules to it. There's a lot of talking that happens, a lot of discussion going back and forth. It ends up depending a lot on who is the concertmaster at the time as to how the protocol, if there is any protocol to the discussion, or how much involvement everybody has. But yeah, it's often very much a forum where people can be involved and express ideas and thoughts, and ideally in a place where you have the time to experiment with things. With somebody has an idea, ideally you can put it out there and you can try it, and we can. But that takes time. That's one of the probably the biggest reason why it just takes more rehearsals for unconducted chamber orchestra than. So, but then at some point somebody has to make a decision, and whether that's a group decision or. Often whoever's leading, taking the reins and saying, okay, this is where we'll go. But that's can be very different with different groups as well. There are certainly groups that also have much more ordered protocols about who makes the decisions, and often it rotates around so that the group of principals that are playing a particular piece will meet, and they're the ones responsible for those decisions, but it's a different group for another piece or another concert or something like that, which gives everybody a little more both the opportunity to sort of take the reins, but also recognizing that when they're not in that situation, that they can give ideas, but they're not the decisive ones. So it varies a lot between the different groups. And sometimes it works well. Sometimes it takes a lot of time.
Well, I always find it so fascinating talking to people that work outside of what you think of as like the quote-unquote traditional context, like double bass section, or maybe like in the jazz context, like, and I know this is an impossible question to answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Like how, spending all the time you do playing in conductorless groups and chamber groups, how do you think that's changed your approach to being a bass player in general?
I think for me, the primary change with that, the things that I feel really lucky about is that I've been very involved in the musical decision-making process in most of the groups that I've played with from early on. And I think that what comes most out of that is that it gets me out of the bass line. And what is fascinating to me, what I enjoy most about music making is the entirety of what's happening and the interactions. That's what keeps, well, I'm trying to remember. I stopped counting the trout quintets that I'd done at 120 or something like that.
Wow.
It's way back. And I can honestly say that I still love it every time I play it. And what I love about it is that I love the interactions. I love how things are different each time. I love how it can respond to the different lines, different instruments each time, and I discover something new every single time I play the piece. And that to me is what keeps it alive and keeps me, if it was just playing the bass line of the trout quintet that many times, it would stop long ago. It got me from playing in situations like that from early on, had me looking outward, looking beyond the bass and to everything else that's happening. It still happens that I still love playing in orchestra. I feel very, very lucky to be able to still play regularly with groups like Handel and Haydn or Philharmonia Baroque. I play a fair amount with the National Symphony when I'm in DC. And I love playing in the section. I love going there, and I love even more in that situation to be completely, and there's so much happening in the orchestra, and there's so much to discover. I almost always have a score on the chair next to me, because there's so much I always want to know. So yeah, that's probably the biggest change in the focus.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you have a score for whatever. Is looking at the score and studying the score a part of your preparation process for pieces with the new chamber?
Absolutely.
Orchestra? Okay,
every time. As a matter of fact, I just recently, this is the first program, I finally did something I've been kind of dreaming of for a long time. I finally got an iPad Pro, and
me too, by the way.
Yeah.
It's like the greatest thing ever.
Is.
Yeah, okay.
And with a foot pedal, and I read from the score.
Really?
And all the time, or as much as I can. And it just changes the entire equation to have everything in front of me. I've always been a massive marker of cues and wanting to know what's happening, and all of a sudden now I can just highlight something or it's all right in front of me all the time, and I love it.
Well, and then having the foot pedal, then all of a sudden the score is practical, which is the main reason why you wouldn't read a score, is because it's the practicality of having to flip pages all the time. That's before the iPad Pro, and I can't say I could talk for 5 hours about I love that thing so much, and for teaching and for I always think it's really interesting, like different cue notational systems. Like, did you come up with any sort of formulas or ways of marking your part, like in chamber? Like, I know, I would almost write I came up with these weird little hieroglyphics for myself for different pieces. Did you have any sort of?
Actually, most of the cues that I marked were almost always literally what other instruments have. So whether it's just rhythmic notation, usually the most valuable to me, but and so the things I could write in quickly, or what most often would happen is I just put a question mark in the part, and then I go back and find the score and put in exactly what I need in terms of quick notations usually for me were just something to go back and put in the information I really needed, which is usually from the score.
Well, and you do a ton of period instrument playing, and as being in those two different, you play all sorts of different repertoire, obviously with New Century and other chamber ensembles. And then you're doing period playing and on gut strings. And, how just, and again, sorry about the broad questions, but how approaches to articulation, sound, phrasing, what are some of those shifts in your brain between those two modalities of playing?
I came to the period world through actually I came first exposed to it when I was in Europe, and it was such a different place there. It was the thing that interests me and excites me about period playing is that it's maybe it sounds sort of oxymoronic, but it is actually, for me, the place where things are often very fresh and very new, where there's a sense of exploration in the music making. Even though it's going back to something old, there's this sense of digging deeper, trying to find something different, or trying to find something that's you can base something on or have ideas with, and then applying those ideas into and learning something from playing the instruments that are the way they were set up. Articulations are naturally different just because of the equipment, or responses are naturally different, and then taking those ideas and recognizing how that would affect the way the music was created or the way the music was played. And so it's a sense of experimentation, and that a mindset also that goes with that in the people that are involved in period playing is one of exploration, of taking the time to try things out, and not necessarily. In the modern world, things can often happen very, very quickly. You only have a few rehearsals. The period world generally spends more time and the time to experiment, the time to try things out, to try to decide and really come to a consensus on musical ideas and direction and articulation and all these different things. So it's more the mindset for me that goes along with it that I find fascinating, and it's also something that I've never. I love the period world, but I've never felt like it's looking for something definitive. It's not, for me, it's looking for something to inform my playing and inform the rest of my playing, and I bring things I learned from the period world into my playing into the modern world, definitely, and vice versa. I think that the things like the standards of intonation and the basics of playing are now being brought to the period world in a way that it's not okay if it's out of tune anymore, and which is great.
Sure.
So yeah, for me it's they're very distinct worlds, but there's also so much to be learned from both of them, and that's what's exciting to me about going back and forth between actually all of the worlds I'm lucky enough to play in, going from the chamber music world to a big orchestra, to a chamber orchestra, to playing on gut strings and all that stuff.
We'll wrap up this conversation with Tony in just a moment, but I want to give a shout out to our third sponsor for the episode, the A440 Violin Shop, an institution in Roscoe Village. That's a beautiful neighborhood just west of Wrigley Field in Chicago, Illinois, my longtime hometown. And they are a great place to go if you're looking for repairs. I had cracks repaired. I had sound posts reset, fingerboards dressed, you name it, from A440. They're a great place for not only repairs, but for instruments. I've had so many students pick up instruments over the years from A440, and they have fine pedigree basses as well. So whatever you're looking for, A440violinshop.com is the website. And if you are in the Midwest, make a trip to Chicago, check out their shop. You won't be disappointed. All right, we are wrapping up this conversation with Anthony Manzo. Here we go.
This different playing you do, and then you're in this, one bass, role in this just small ensembles, and then with all the travel, going to different places, how do you keep yourself just together technically on the bass, or working on pieces? I mean, you're here in San Francisco, then you're headed to New York, and then do you have you get the bass, you unpack it, you assemble it, you're in the new town, do you have any routines you typically go through on the bass just to keep your chops up or to prepare new repertoire?
Honestly, not I wouldn't say particular routines. There's always just basically time spent with the when I unpack the bass and put it together, to put the removable neck back on. It usually takes at least half an hour before the instrument's stable.
Oh, really? Okay.
And realistically more. I try not to ever have a rehearsal or something like that closer than half an hour, and ideally significantly more than that, just because the instrument will still be all over the place. But I often take that time to do long tones, to do the basics. Just trying to warm things up, sort of remind myself of what instrument I'm playing and how this one responds. So not any particular rigid routines, but it's mostly finding familiarity, remembering which tuning I'm using, and things like that. Sure.
Do you use alternate tunings like in the early?
I do some. I'm not yet proficient enough on Viennese tuning to be comfortable switching back and forth to that, but certainly there's a fair amount of moving around, especially if the lower strings. Often play with a low D or C if I need to, and a fair amount of switching around.
Cool. I'd love to, and people would love to hear we've talked about where you're at now, how did bass come into your life? Where'd you grow up? How did you get started in music? Just tell me a little bit about.
I grew up in Central Florida, in Winter Haven.
Yeah.
And it was a happy accident. There was a woman who came down from New York and married somebody from Winter Haven, and she was a singer and was looking for some way to keep music in her life, and she founded a youth orchestra. And because of this youth orchestra, it went on for I think 10 or 12 years, and then they divorced, and she went back, and the orchestra died. I caught the back end of that, and the last couple of years of that, and there was, and as an offshoot of that, there was a fairly strong strings program in the schools that started as a direct result of this youth orchestra being there, and so I had the benefit of these string programs in my school year starting in 7th grade, and unfortunately, those programs have now died. It doesn't exist in the parts of that in my hometown anymore, which is a real shame to lose that. It's such an influence on me, and so I started there, and I went to school in Boston at Boston University. I studied with Jim Orleans, a fantastic member of the Boston Symphony section, and then went from there to I played with the New World Symphony for 3 years down in Miami, which is also a fantastic experience, and then went from there to my first job in Norway in the Bergen Philharmonic. From the Bergen Philharmonic to the Munich Chamber Orchestra for 7 years, and then from there to move to Washington D.C., where my wife is a cellist of the National Symphony, and I started in the real chamber music and chamber orchestra world.
Yeah. It's just remarkable that like I think people think of having a career as a chamber music bassist is like not a thing that's possible, but it's obviously possible. I mean, that's what you're doing, and then people. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Louis Levitt and Sybarite 5. He's created this completely. I mean, that's his gig. It's just like doing that. So it is possible. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to explore? I mean, everybody's career path is different. There's no but someone who's interested in getting more into that world.
Yeah, it's first off, recognizing that it's a tough situation, but it's a situation where you create what you want. It's not a world that will come to you.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
It often does take exactly that. I say that, and I feel I'm one of the luckiest ever in that situation, because a lot of it has come to me. I'm not a particularly. I've never been a self-promoter,
sure.
And I don't do well of like calling attention to myself.
Yeah.
But I've been lucky enough for these things to happen. But certainly in the world that we're coming to now, in a way, it's one of the most exciting places, because it's a place. I think the music world, the classical music world, is going in the direction a lot more of going to these smaller groups, groups that are dynamic, groups that are more fully and completely invested in what they're doing, and so I would, find something you love. Most importantly, find people you want to do it with, that you want to play with, that you could really work with and go for for a long term with, and that's where things will come to life if you keep after it and keep going. And I'm lucky enough to be in a place where that's the first question I ask now when I'm asked to do something is, who else is playing? And it may seem like it is a light question, but it's also an incredibly important one, because I'm happy to play with just about anybody, but it changed. I know my expectations change with who I'm going to play with, and I'm in a place where I want to make music with people I really want to enjoy and who I share things with and share a mindset with, and happy to work super hard with people that are in the same place.
Yeah. Well, this is great. Thanks for chatting. I really
my pleasure.
Tony, so great hanging out with you and chatting. And folks, check out the show notes for this episode for links to the various groups that Tony plays in, that story of his bass getting converted by Upton, and much more. And how cool that Anthony is making his career as a chamber double bass player. Playing chamber ensembles, playing chamber orchestras is so inspiring and so cool, and I love doing conversations like this. I love, especially these live conversations are my favorite. Of course, sometimes you do Skype or you do FaceTime because it's the most convenient option, but if there's a way to do it live, I just so prefer that. And how fun sitting there in San Francisco's North Beach with its cast of characters. And there are a lot of characters in that neighborhood pulling out the microphones. And I've done this enough in public that I just love seeing people's reactions. When I do it in a restaurant, it's amazing. People are like, oh, and they kind of stay away from you for the duration of your chat, kind of like curiously glancing. Outside the park in North Beach, a little bit of a different story, but very fun. And we didn't have anybody directly come up and bug us. So yay. And if you are tuning in for the first time or this is one of your first episodes, welcome. I would love to get to know you, meet you, whether that's via email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Send me a message. That would be great. Or get on our email list or get on our email list over at contrabassconversations.com. And we continue this conversation each and every week about all things going on in the bass world. You can also join our Facebook community. We have some wonderfully active members in there. We're into the thousands, I believe, at this point with that group. contrabassconversations.com/community, or just go to Facebook and search for us there. If you hang out on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, we are there. Connect with us there. And forward this episode to a friend. I'm sure somebody in your life, bass player or otherwise, would love to hear this conversation about chamber music, about travel, horror stories, about all that kind of good stuff that Tony and I chatted about. That would be awesome. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.